My first question, which really should be between the 40-yard line here, and even I think Doug will have an interesting answer to this question too. I'm quoting from a Wall Street Journal editorial by Andrew Napolitano, a former judge and Fox News senior legal analyst. He ran into South Carolina Congressman James Clyburn, the third-ranking Democrat in the House, and asked him, where is it authorized in the federal government in the Constitution to regulate the delivery of health care? And Clyburn replied, quote, "There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the federal government has anything to do with most of the stuff we do." And then he realized he made a mistake and shot back, "Well, can you tell me where in the Constitution it says I can't do that?" Yeah. And he ran off. Well, absolutely. The 9th and 10th Amendments tell you you have enumerated powers and you can't do anything beyond that. Now, I look at the Constitution as a writer and editor and think it's fairly clearly written, but there have been legal problems about the Commerce Clause and so forth that I don't understand at all. And I'm a fairly intelligent person as an editor and so forth. So I would like to ask our panelists, I'm going to start with Howard Dean on this one. What authorizes Congress to do most of the things it does?
I think it's probably the General Welfare Clause, which is kind of a catch-all. This has been litigated in the sense that Social Security has been litigated. And if you don't, since Social Security has been upheld, I think you can probably infer from that that the health care system would be upheld. The most interesting question that's been raised on this is what power does the government have to require individuals to buy health insurance, which is what is currently in most of the bills, the individual mandate. I think that's a more precise question. It's an interesting question, but I still suspect that it would be upheld in the same way that people can mandate the draft, people can mandate individual auto insurance ownership and so forth and so on. I think it's actually a decent issue to raise, and it's one that will be litigated.
Karl Rove, I'm thinking in terms of the bills domestically that your people passed, including, No Child Left Behind, education bills like that, and Medicare prescription benefits and all this. Where's that?
Well, let's start with the first one, the first question that you asked. I don't agree with Howard on the individual mandate. I think that would be very hard to find something in the Constitution that says the federal government has the power to compel you to buy health insurance. I do think that you could make the argument that the tax provisions fall within the power of the government to tax. And let's realize a lot of what we're talking about here does have to do with the taxing power of the government, which is what makes it dangerous. But I think it's an interesting question. I've read these briefs. There are two of them that I've seen that make the case against a constitutional provision that allows health care. I've talked to a couple of constitutional lawyers. I think the General Welfare Clause is a problem. The Interstate Commerce Clause would give them, for example, the ability to say, if you're going to buy insurance, we're going to require insurance that is sold across state lines to meet these following provisions. But look, the bottom line is that the question is, how do we beat this? And we beat this by offering a free market alternative. I'm frankly in favor of saying people ought to be able to buy health insurance across state lines just like they buy auto insurance. It would make more competition, drive down price, increase benefits. I believe that we ought to have in the tax system something that says, like if you own a home and you get a deduction for your interest payments, you ought to, if you get health insurance, buy it out of your own pocket or have it provided by your company. You ought to get a health deduction if you're the individual. The benefit shouldn't just go to the corporation. We ought to have liability reform. There are other things that we ought to do. We ought to allow people to band together to pool their risk to associated health plans. Small business people should be able to join together. All the left-handed orthodontists, let all the people who own fast food joints, let all the Lutherans, whoever they are, let them band together and pool their risk in order to get the same discounts that the big boys get. This is where government has disallowed the actions of free individuals that would actually lower the cost of health care, provide greater access, and give us greater freedom.
Doug, would you be interested in a government that followed the Constitution more strictly?
Look, the Constitution is a dead letter. The entire Constitution at this point, in good measure, because of what happened during the Bush regime, is about as meaningful as the 9th and 10th Amendments are. Totally dead letters. It's been interpreted out of existence by the Supreme Court, which is just 9 corrupt old men who are government employees, for God's sake.
And women, don't forget the women.
Yes, and the women now, that's right. But, and Karl's answer about the insurance was intelligent, and technically I agree with that. It's an intelligent solution, but you've got to go to the core of the problem. And Karl, I don't think you should be talking about, this is the problem with Republicans. They always appear like, you know, Bush used to use freedom in his speeches all the time. And they always appear as defenders of the free market and defenders of capitalism, but they are the worst enemies of it. And the proof of that is, and they're the worst enemies of it because they do all the things the Democrats would do, just with different rhetoric that discredits the free market system.
Yeah, look.
And as evidence of this, the fact that I don't believe Karl, I don't believe that, listen, you seem like a very nice fellow. I'm glad we didn't have lunch before, because I'd see you more as a person as opposed to...
Oh, please, see me as a cipher. Don't see me as a human being. As libertarians, as people with libertarian instincts, we shouldn't see people as individuals. We just see them as anomalous cartoons.
Well,
so go ahead
Karl,
and do that.
I believe that you and all your pals that were in the White House in the last regime should be prosecuted for war crimes, among other things. Things like the criminality with Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, starting the ridiculous war on terror.
Look, Doug, with all due respect, libertarians believe in personal responsibility. The people who committed Abu Ghraib were held personally responsible for their actions, and most of them are in jail. So please, don't adopt the worst impulses of the left and say everybody. I mean, please. Look. I grew up in the West. I grew up in the West. I have libertarian instincts. I grew up in the Big West, the Rocky Mountain West. I have libertarian instincts. The difference between me and a pure libertarian is I want to have an impact. I don't want to sit on the sidelines and live in New Zealand or live in Argentina and criticize. I want to get in and change things and drive them in the right direction towards freedom. That's what I want to do.
Well,